Imagine standing on the shores of an ancient ocean, watching as colossal waves crash against towering stone monuments that dwarf anything built by human hands. These aren't the remnants of some forgotten civilization scattered across remote islands. These are the last whispers of something far more extraordinary, something that challenges everything we think we know about the rise of human society. What if the very first superstate on Earth wasn't Rome, wasn't Egypt, wasn't even Mesopotamia, but a vast continental empire that vanished beneath the waves so completely that we've relegated it to myth? Welcome to Mystery History for Sleep, where we dive deep into the shadows of our forgotten past. I'm your guide through the labyrinth of lost worlds, and tonight we're embarking on a journey that will take us from the depths of the Pacific Ocean to the heights of human imagination. We're going to explore one of the most tantalizing mysteries in all of human history, the lost continent of Lemuria, and the radical possibility that it wasn't just some mythical land, but Earth's first true superstate. Now, before you dismiss this as pure fantasy, let me share something that might change your perspective entirely. Over the past century, archaeologists have been uncovering evidence of sophisticated civilizations that existed thousands of years before we thought complex societies were even possible. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, with its massive stone circles dating back 11,000 years, built by people who supposedly hadn't even invented agriculture yet. The underwater ruins off the coast of Japan, submerged when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower than they are today. And that's just the beginning. But here's what's really fascinating. Ancient cultures from across the globe, separated by vast oceans and thousands of years, all share remarkably similar stories. Stories of a great land that once existed in the Pacific, populated by beings of incredible wisdom and power. The Aboriginals of Australia speak of the Dreamtime, when their ancestors crossed vast land masses that no longer exist. Hindu texts describe the continent of Kumari Kandam, a southern landmass where advanced civilizations flourished before catastrophic floods. Even the Tamil people of South India have preserved detailed accounts of Lemuria in their most sacred literature. These aren't just random myths floating around in isolation. We're talking about consistent, detailed accounts from cultures that had no contact with each other, describing the same basic story. A massive continent in the Pacific Ocean, home to an advanced civilization, destroyed by some great catastrophe and swallowed by the sea. Now you might be thinking, come on, surely someone would have found evidence of this by now, and you'd be right to be skeptical. The scientific establishment has largely dismissed Lemuria as Victorian-era pseudoscience. But what if they're wrong? What if we've been looking in the wrong places, or worse? What if we've been deliberately ignoring the evidence that's been staring us in the face all along? Let me paint you a picture of what we're really dealing with here. This isn't just about some lost island or even a large land mass. The ancient accounts describe Lemuria as a continent spanning much of what is now the Pacific Ocean. We're talking about a landmass potentially larger than Australia, complete with mountain ranges, river systems, and vast civilizations that may have been more advanced than anything that came after. The Tamil Sangam literature, some of the oldest surviving texts in any Dravidian language, describes not one, not two, but three separate Tamil kingdoms that existed on this lost continent. They speak of grand academies of learning, sophisticated urban centres, and a maritime empire that traded with cultures across the known world. These weren't primitive settlements we're talking about. According to these accounts, Lemuria was home to the world's first truly organised superstate. But here's where things get really interesting. The destruction of Lemuria, according to these same ancient sources, wasn't gradual. It wasn't the slow erosion of coastlines or the gentle rise of sea levels over millennia. It was sudden, catastrophic, and complete. The texts describe massive earthquakes, towering waves, and entire mountain ranges disappearing beneath the ocean in a matter of days or weeks. Sound familiar? It should, because this exact same pattern of catastrophic destruction appears in myths and legends from around the world. Plato's Atlantis, destroyed in a single day and night, the biblical flood that covered the earth, the Hindu Puranas describing cycles of creation and destruction, the Norse Ragnarok, the Mayan prophecies of world ages ending in cataclysm. Now here's what's absolutely mind-blowing about all of this. Modern geology is starting to confirm that such catastrophic events are not only possible, they're inevitable. We now know that the Earth's crust is far more unstable than we once believed. Massive crustal displacement events triggered by cosmic impacts or sudden shifts in the planet's rotational axis could theoretically cause entire continents to sink beneath the ocean in a matter of days. The Younger Dryas period, which occurred roughly 12,000 years ago, saw global temperatures plummet by as much as 15 degrees in less than a decade. Massive ice sheets melted almost overnight, causing sea levels to rise by hundreds of feet. Entire ecosystems were wiped out. Megafauna that had survived for millions of years suddenly went extinct. And according to an increasing number of researchers, this wasn't just climate change. This was the result of one or more cosmic impacts that literally reshaped the face of the planet. What if Lemuria was one of the casualties of this global catastrophe? What if this advanced Pacific civilization, this first superstate, was thriving right up until the moment when cosmic forces beyond their control brought their world to an end? But let's step back for a moment and really examine what we mean when we talk about a superstate. In modern political terms, we think of superstates as massive political entities that encompass multiple nations or ethnic groups under a single governing system. Think of the Soviet Union, or the European Union, or even the United States in its current form. These are political structures that transcend traditional tribal or ethnic boundaries and create unified systems of governance, trade and culture across vast geographical areas. Now, if Lemuria really was Earth's first superstate, what would that have looked like 12 or 15,000 years ago? We're talking about a time when, according to conventional archaeology, humans were still living in small hunter-gatherer bands, barely beginning to experiment with agriculture, and certainly not building anything more complex than temporary shelters. But what if conventional archaeology is wrong? What if human civilization is far older than we've been taught? The evidence is starting to pile up that complex human societies existed much earlier than we've traditionally believed. And not just complex societies, but societies that may have been more advanced than anything that came after. Consider this. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built supposedly by the ancient Egyptians using nothing but copper tools and human labour, displays a level of precision in its construction that we can barely match with modern technology. The massive stones at Baalbek in Lebanon, some weighing over 800 tons, were somehow quarried, transported and lifted into place using methods that remain completely mysterious to us today. The ancient maps of Piraeus show the coastline of Antarctica as it appeared before it was covered by ice, suggesting that someone was conducting sophisticated global surveys at a time when such knowledge should have been impossible. What if all of these achievements weren't the work of primitive civilizations struggling with basic technology, but the remnants of a much older, much more advanced global civilization? What if Lemuria was the source of this ancient knowledge, the birthplace of technologies and organizational systems that were later copied and adapted by cultures around the world? The more you dig into the ancient accounts of Lemuria, the more sophisticated the civilization becomes. The Tamil texts don't just describe cities and kingdoms, they describe academies of learning where scholars from across the known world came to study advanced mathematics, astronomy, and natural philosophy. They speak of sophisticated irrigation systems that could transform entire regions. They describe metallurgy techniques that could produce alloys superior to anything known in the historical period. They even hint at energy technologies that we don't fully understand today. And here's something that should make you sit up and pay attention. The ancient accounts consistently describe the Lemurians as being physically different from modern humans. They're described as being taller, longer-lived, and possessing mental abilities that seem almost superhuman by our standards. They're said to have been able to communicate telepathically, to have had perfect memory recall, and to have possessed an intuitive understanding of natural forces that allowed them to work with the environment in ways that we can barely imagine. Now, before you write this off as pure mythology, consider this. Modern genetics is revealing that the human genome contains DNA sequences that don't appear to have evolved naturally. The so-called junk DNA that makes up the majority of our genetic code is turning out to be far from junk. It's incredibly complex, highly organized, and appears to contain information that we're only beginning to decode. What if the Lemurians weren't just an advanced human civilization, but a different branch of human evolution entirely? What if they were the result of genetic engineering, either by an even older terrestrial civilization, or by influences from beyond our planet? The ancient texts are remarkably consistent in describing the Lemurians as having been created or awakened by divine beings who came from the stars. This might sound like science fiction, But it's worth noting that every major breakthrough in human understanding has initially been dismissed as impossible by the scientific establishment of its time. The idea that continents could move was ridiculed for decades before plate tectonics became accepted science. The notion that impacts from space could cause mass extinctions was considered fringe theory until the discovery of the Chicxulub crater proved that an asteroid wiped out the dinosaurs. So what if we're dealing with something similar here? What if the evidence for Lemuria has been hiding in plain sight, dismissed by academics who are too invested in the current paradigm to consider alternatives? Let's talk about some of that evidence. First, there's the geological anomaly known as the Kerguelen Plateau, a massive underwater landmass in the southern Indian Ocean that was once above sea level. This isn't speculation, it's established geological fact. Core samples from the plateau have revealed fossilized wood and pollen from land plants, proving that this now submerged region once supported terrestrial ecosystems. But here's what's interesting. The Kerguelen Plateau is enormous. We're talking about a landmass roughly the size of India, now lying beneath thousands of feet of ocean water, and it's not alone. Sonar mapping of the ocean floor has revealed the existence of numerous other submerged landmasses, particularly in the Pacific, that were once above sea level during periods of lower ocean levels. The Ontong Java Plateau in the Pacific is another massive underwater landmass, roughly the size of Alaska, that shows clear evidence of having been above water in the relatively recent geological past. The Manihiki Plateau, the Hess Rise, the Shatsky Rise. All of these are enormous underwater features that could have supported large land masses and potentially complex civilizations during periods when sea levels were lower. And here's the kicker. Many of these underwater plateaus show evidence of artificial structures. Sonar imaging has revealed what appear to be regular geometric patterns, straight lines, and right angles in areas where such features should not occur naturally. The infamous Bimini Road off the coast of the Bahamas, the underwater pyramids near Japan's Yonaguni Island, the massive stone circles discovered off the coast of Turkey. All of these suggest human activity in areas that have been underwater for thousands of years. But perhaps the most compelling evidence for Lemuria comes from an unexpected source: the distribution of life forms across the planet. You see, when biologists first started studying the global distribution of plants and animals in the 19th century, they noticed something very strange. Species that were clearly related to each other were found in locations separated by vast oceans, with no apparent way for them to have crossed from one continent to another. Lemurs, for example, are found in Madagascar and nowhere else in Africa. But their closest relatives live thousands of miles away in Southeast Asia. How did this happen? The conventional explanation is that these animals somehow managed to cross vast ocean barriers on floating debris or through incredibly unlikely series of chance dispersal events. But what if there's a simpler explanation? What if these species were once connected by land masses that no longer exist? What if Madagascar was once connected to a vast continent that stretched across the Indian Ocean, allowing species to migrate freely between what are now isolated landmasses? This is actually where the name Lemuria comes from. It was coined by 19th century biologist Philip Sclater to explain the distribution of lemur fossils across the Indian Ocean region. Sclater proposed that there must once have been a large landmass connecting Madagascar, India and Southeast Asia, which he named Lemuria after the lemurs whose distribution it would explain. The scientific establishment eventually dismissed Sclater's Lemuria in favour of continental drift theory, which explained the distribution of species through the movement of existing continents, rather than the existence of now vanished ones. But what if both explanations are partially correct? What if continental drift occurred alongside the rise and fall of additional land masses that aren't accounted for in current geological models? Recent studies of ocean floor sediments have revealed evidence of massive tsunamis and underwater landslides that occurred at the end of the last ice age, around the same time that sea levels rose dramatically due to melting glaciers. These events would have been more than capable of submerging entire continents, particularly if they were combined with seismic activity or cosmic impacts. The Storegga slide off the coast of Norway, which occurred roughly 8,000 years ago, involved the movement of more than 3,000 cubic kilometres of sediment and generated tsunamis that reached heights of over 20 metres. Similar underwater landslides have been identified in ocean basins around the world, many of them dating to the same general time period when human civilizations were supposedly just beginning to develop agriculture. What if these geological events weren't just random natural disasters, but the cause of the greatest catastrophe in human history? What if they were responsible for destroying not just individual settlements or regions, but an entire global civilization that we've now forgotten? This brings us to one of the most intriguing aspects of the Lemuria hypothesis: the suggestion that this wasn't just an isolated civilization, but the center of a global network of advanced cultures. The ancient accounts don't describe Lemuria as existing in isolation. Instead, they speak of trade relationships, cultural exchanges, and even colonial settlements that connected this Pacific superstate with cultures around the world. Hindu texts describe regular contact between Lemuria and the ancient kingdoms of India. Egyptian records hint at mysterious visitors from the land of Punt, who brought advanced knowledge and exotic goods. Chinese legends speak of the Dragon Kings, who came from islands in the southern seas. Even Native American traditions contain accounts of ancient teachers who arrived from across the Pacific, bringing knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and sacred architecture. What if all of these accounts are describing the same thing? What if Lemuria was the hub of Earth's first truly global civilization, connected by maritime trade routes that spanned the world's oceans? This would explain why we find similar megalithic structures, similar astronomical alignments, and similar mythological themes in cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other. It would also explain why human civilization seems to have emerged simultaneously in multiple locations around the world, rather than spreading gradually from a single point of origin. If there was already a global network of knowledge and trade connecting distant regions, then the sudden appearance of complex societies in places like Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China wouldn't be sudden at all. It would simply be the re-establishment of civilization in regions that had maintained contact with the Lemurian network. But if this is true, if Lemuria really was Earth's first superstate and the center of a global civilization, then what happened to it? Why did this advanced society vanish so completely that we've almost forgotten it ever existed? The answer, according to the ancient accounts, lies in a catastrophe so complete and devastating that it literally reset human civilization. But this wasn't just any catastrophe. This was an event that changed the very structure of the planet itself, and its effects are still visible today if you know where to look. The geological evidence for this catastrophe is written in stone, quite literally, across every continent on Earth. But it's evidence that mainstream science has been reluctant to acknowledge because it challenges our most fundamental assumptions about the gradual uniformitarian processes that supposedly shape our planet. Take the phenomenon known as crustal displacement, first proposed by Professor Charles Hapgood in the 1950s. Hapgood suggested that the Earth's outer crust could, under certain circumstances, shift rapidly over the more fluid mantle beneath it, causing entire continents to move to new positions in a matter of days or weeks. Einstein himself was intrigued by this theory, writing to Hapgood that his ideas had electrifying implications for our understanding of geological processes. Now imagine what would happen if such a displacement event occurred while a massive continent like Lemuria existed in the Pacific. The sudden shift in the Earth's crust would create unimaginable seismic activity. Entire mountain ranges would buckle and collapse. Ocean basins would be thrust upward while land masses plunged into the depths. The very geography of the planet would be rewritten in a geological instant. But crustal displacement alone might not be enough to explain the complete obliteration of such an advanced civilization. For that, we need to look at the growing body of evidence for cosmic impacts during the Younger Dryas period. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggests that around 12,800 years ago, a massive cosmic object, possibly a comet or asteroid, struck the Earth with enough force to trigger global climate change and mass extinctions. Recent discoveries have identified impact materials, including nanodiamonds and shocked quartz, in geological layers dating to exactly this time period. These materials are found not just in one location, but scattered across multiple continents, suggesting that the impact event was far more massive than previously imagined. Some researchers now believe we're looking at evidence of multiple impacts, possibly from a fragmented comet that struck various points around the globe simultaneously. Picture this scenario: a massive Lemurian civilization thriving in the Pacific, with advanced cities, sophisticated technology, and trade networks spanning the globe. Then, without warning, the sky erupts in fire. Multiple cosmic objects streak through the atmosphere, some impacting in the ocean, others striking land. The impacts generate earthquakes of unprecedented magnitude, triggering crustal displacement events that literally rearrange the continents. The ocean impacts create mega tsunamis hundreds of feet high that race across the Pacific at supersonic speeds. These walls of water don't just flood coastal areas, they scour entire continents clean, carrying away every trace of surface civilization. Simultaneously, the land impacts throw vast quantities of debris into the atmosphere, blocking out the sun and triggering a nuclear winter that lasts for centuries. In this scenario, Lemuria wouldn't just sink beneath the waves. It would be obliterated so completely that future archaeologists would find virtually no trace of its existence. The survivors, scattered to remote regions that escaped the worst of the devastation, would be forced to start over from scratch, carrying with them only fragments of their former knowledge and confused memories of the world that was lost. This would explain why so many ancient cultures have similar flood myths and speak of a golden age that was destroyed by divine wrath. It would explain why human civilization seems to have suffered a massive setback around 12,000 years ago, with hunter-gatherer societies replacing more complex cultures across much of the globe, and it would explain why the few megalithic sites that survived this catastrophe display technologies and astronomical knowledge that seem far too advanced for the supposedly primitive societies that built them. But here's what's truly fascinating about the Lemurian hypothesis. It suggests that human civilization isn't a recent development that began with agriculture around 10,000 years ago. Instead, it proposes that we're actually living in the aftermath of a much older, much more advanced global civilization that was almost completely destroyed by cosmic catastrophe. Consider the implications of this. If Lemuria really was Earth's first superstate, then every major civilization that followed, from ancient Egypt to the Roman Empire to modern nation-states, has been essentially a recovery civilization, struggling to rebuild from the fragments of knowledge that survived the Great Catastrophe. This would explain why certain technologies seem to have been invented multiple times throughout history, only to be lost and rediscovered again. It would explain why ancient monuments like the pyramids display construction techniques that we can barely replicate today, and it would explain why indigenous cultures around the world have preserved oral traditions speaking of a time when their ancestors possessed knowledge and abilities that seem almost magical by our current standards. The ancient Tamil texts are particularly specific about this. They describe not just one, but 3 separate Sangam periods, or literary academies, that existed on the Lemurian continent. The first Sangam supposedly lasted for 4,140 years and included 549 members who composed literature that filled 4,149 volumes. The second Sangam lasted 3,700 years, with 59 members producing 3,700 volumes. The third and final Sangam, which lasted 1,850 years before the final destruction, had 49 members who created 1,850 volumes of literature. Now, these numbers might seem fantastically large to us, but consider this. If the Lemurians really did possess extended lifespans and perfect memory recall as the ancient accounts suggest, then such lengthy periods of cultural continuity wouldn't be impossible at all. A single individual could potentially witness and participate in centuries of cultural development, accumulating knowledge and wisdom that would be passed down through generations. The descriptions of Lemurian society in these texts paint a picture of a civilization that was organized on a scale we can barely comprehend today. They speak of cities that housed millions of inhabitants, with sophisticated urban planning that included advanced water management, waste disposal, and transportation systems. They describe agricultural techniques that could produce abundant harvests without depleting the soil, and manufacturing processes that created goods of incredible durability and beauty. But perhaps most intriguingly, they describe a social and political system that was both highly organized and remarkably egalitarian. Unlike the hierarchical societies that dominated the historical period, Lemuria is described as being governed by councils of wise elders who were chosen for their knowledge and wisdom rather than their birth or wealth. These councils supposedly made decisions through consensus rather than authoritarian decree, and their primary concern was the long-term welfare of both human society and the natural environment. This kind of organizational structure would indeed qualify Lemuria as Earth's first true superstate, but a superstate of a very different kind than what we're familiar with today. Rather than being based on military conquest and economic domination, Lemurian civilization seems to have been built around principles of cooperation, sustainability, and the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. The technological achievements described in these ancient accounts are equally remarkable, The Lemurians are said to have possessed flying vehicles that could traverse vast distances in a matter of hours. They had communication systems that allowed instant contact between distant locations. They could harness natural forces to provide unlimited energy for their cities and industries. They even possessed medical knowledge that allowed them to extend human lifespan far beyond what we consider normal today. Now, I know what you're thinking. This all sounds suspiciously like science fiction rather than historical fact. And you'd be right to be skeptical, except for one thing. Similar descriptions of advanced technology appear in ancient texts from cultures all around the world that supposedly had no contact with each other. The Sanskrit epics of India describe vimanas, flying machines that could travel through the air and even into space. They speak of weapons that could destroy entire cities with a single blast, and communication devices that allowed people to speak across vast distances. The Mayan Popol Vuh describes the first humans as beings who could see vast distances and possessed knowledge of everything under heaven. Even the Bible contains descriptions of technologies that seem far too advanced for the time periods in which they were supposedly written. What if all of these accounts are describing the same thing? What if they're fragmented memories of Lemurian technology, preserved in the myths and legends of survivor cultures that escaped the Great Catastrophe? This brings us to one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for the Lemurian hypothesis: the global distribution of certain architectural and astronomical knowledge that appears to be far too sophisticated for the cultures that supposedly developed it independently. Consider the fact that megalithic sites around the world display remarkably similar construction techniques, despite being separated by vast distances and thousands of years. The precision-fitted stone walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru are virtually identical to similar structures found in Egypt, Japan, and Easter Island. All of these sites display the same impossible precision in cutting and fitting massive stone blocks, the same use of complex jointing techniques, and the same mysterious ability to transport and position stones weighing hundreds of tons. Even more intriguingly, many of these sites are oriented to the same astronomical alignments. The Great Pyramid of Giza, Angkor Wat in Cambodia, and the temples of Easter Island are all oriented to the constellation Orion as it appeared in the sky around 12,000 years ago, during the supposed time of Lemuria's destruction. This can't be a coincidence. It suggests that whoever built these monuments was working from the same astronomical knowledge base and was commemorating the same significant time period. But the most remarkable evidence might be linguistic. Comparative linguistics has revealed that certain root words and grammatical structures appear in languages from completely different language families around the world. These similarities can't be explained by normal processes of linguistic evolution or contact between cultures. They suggest that all of these languages might have descended from a common ancestor that was spoken by a globally distributed civilization. The Tamil language, which has the oldest continuous literary tradition of any Dravidian language, contains root words that appear in languages as diverse as ancient Egyptian, classical Greek, and even Native American tongues. The word for water in Tamil is near, which is remarkably similar to the word for water in ancient Egyptian, Sumerian, and dozens of other apparently unrelated languages. What if these linguistic similarities aren't the result of chance convergent evolution, but evidence of a global lingua franca that was once spoken by the maritime traders and colonists of the Lemurian Empire? What if Tamil, far from being an isolated regional language, is actually one of the last surviving direct descendants of the language that was once spoken by Earth's first global civilization? The implications of this are staggering. If Lemuria really was a global superstate with colonies and trading posts around the world, then the entire narrative of human history that we've been taught is fundamentally wrong. We haven't been slowly climbing from primitive beginnings toward greater complexity and knowledge. Instead, we've been struggling for thousands of years to recover from the greatest catastrophe in human history, gradually rebuilding a pale shadow of what our ancestors once achieved. This would explain why certain ancient monuments and artifacts display knowledge and capabilities that seem impossible for their supposed time periods. They're not anachronisms or evidence of ancient alien intervention. They're simply the last surviving remnants of a human civilization that was far more advanced than anything that came after it. It would also explain why the rate of technological and social progress has seemed to accelerate so dramatically in recent centuries. We're not developing new knowledge so much as we're rediscovering old knowledge, gradually approaching the level of understanding that our Lemurian ancestors possessed before the great catastrophe reset human civilization. But if this is true, If we really are the descendants of survivors from Earth's first superstate, then what does that mean for our future? Are we destined to eventually surpass the achievements of our ancestors, or are we doomed to repeat the same cycle of rise and catastrophic fall that destroyed Lemuria? The ancient accounts suggest that the Lemurians themselves were aware of this cyclical nature of civilizations. They speak of vast libraries and time capsules that were created to preserve essential knowledge for future generations. They describe advanced individuals who are specifically trained to serve as seed carriers, responsible for ensuring that crucial information would survive even the most complete civilizational collapse. What if some of these preservation efforts were successful? What if there are still Lemurian knowledge repositories hidden somewhere on Earth, waiting to be discovered by a humanity that has finally advanced enough to understand and use them responsibly? Recent discoveries suggest that this might not be as far-fetched as it sounds. Deep ocean exploration has revealed the existence of vast underwater cave systems that were once above sea level, some of which show clear evidence of artificial modification. Satellite imaging has identified geometric anomalies on the ocean floor that appear to be too regular to be natural formations. Even more intriguingly, several of these underwater sites appear to be aligned with the same astronomical orientations found at ancient megalithic sites around the world. Could these be the remains of Lemurian preservation sites? Could the knowledge that was lost when the great continent sank beneath the waves still be waiting for us in underwater vaults and chambers that have remained sealed for 12,000 years? The possibility is tantalizing, but it also raises profound questions about whether we're ready for such knowledge. If Lemuria really was destroyed by cosmic catastrophe, what does that say about the stability of our own civilization? Are we building toward our own inevitable destruction? Or have we learned enough from the mistakes of our ancestors to avoid repeating their fate? The ancient accounts suggest that the Lemurians possessed not just advanced technology, but advanced wisdom about the proper relationship between civilization and the natural world. They supposedly understood that true progress required not just the accumulation of knowledge and power, but the development of wisdom about how to use that knowledge responsibly. Perhaps that's the most important lesson we can learn from the Lemurian hypothesis. Whether or not a literal continent of Lemuria ever existed in the Pacific, the idea of Lemuria represents something crucial about the human condition, our potential for both greatness and catastrophic failure, and our responsibility to learn from the past in order to build a better future. As we stand on the threshold of potentially becoming a global civilization ourselves, connected by technology and facing challenges that require planetary cooperation to solve, the story of Lemuria serves as both inspiration and warning. It reminds us that we are capable of achieving wonders beyond our current imagination, but it also warns us that no civilization, no matter how advanced, is immune to the forces that can bring it to destruction. The question is whether we'll be wise enough to heed that warning, or whether we're doomed to repeat the cycle that may have already played out once before in the lost continent that lies sleeping beneath the Pacific waves. The deeper we delve into the Lemurian enigma, the more we encounter a disturbing pattern that should make anyone seeking truth pause and take notice. You see, the suppression of evidence regarding lost civilizations isn't just an academic oversight. It's systematic, deliberate, and it raises uncomfortable questions about what certain institutions don't want us to discover about our own past. Consider this. Every time a major archaeological discovery emerges that challenges the conventional timeline of human development, it faces an immediate campaign of discreditation. The underwater structures off the coast of Japan were dismissed as natural formations despite their obvious geometric precision. The Baltic Sea anomaly, a clearly artificial object resting on the ocean floor, has been ignored by mainstream media and academic institutions alike. Even the recent discoveries of advanced tool-making technologies dating back hundreds of thousands of years are quietly buried in obscure journals where the general public will never encounter them. But why? What's so threatening about the idea that human civilization might be older and more sophisticated than we've been taught? The answer lies in understanding what the Lemurian hypothesis really represents. It's not just about one lost continent. It's about the possibility that we're living in a carefully constructed narrative designed to keep us ignorant of our true potential as a species. Think about it this way. If Lemuria really existed as Earth's first superstate, then everything we've been told about the gradual progression of human society is a lie. The idea that we've evolved from primitive hunter-gatherers to our current level of technological sophistication through steady, incremental progress becomes not just wrong, but laughably naive. Instead, we're forced to confront the possibility that we're actually technological and spiritual degenerates, struggling to reclaim abilities and knowledge that our ancestors took for granted. This isn't just about ancient history. This is about power, control, and the maintenance of systems that depend on keeping humanity in a state of artificial limitation. If people truly understood that our ancestors once possessed technologies that could harness unlimited energy from natural sources, that they could communicate telepathically across vast distances, that they lived in harmony with the environment while supporting populations far larger than today's industrial civilization, then the entire foundation of our current economic and political systems would crumble overnight. The evidence for this systematic suppression is everywhere once you start looking. Academic careers are destroyed for pursuing research that contradicts established timelines. Archaeological sites that might contain inconvenient evidence are declared off-limits or are mysteriously damaged by natural disasters. Ancient texts that describe advanced technologies are dismissed as mythology, despite their technical precision and consistency across cultures. But perhaps most tellingly, the very concept of Lemuria has been deliberately associated with New Age mysticism and fringe theories, making it impossible for serious researchers to investigate without risking their professional reputations. This is a classic technique of information control. Take a potentially dangerous idea and surround it with so much nonsense that legitimate inquiry becomes impossible, yet the evidence keeps mounting. Recent advances in satellite imaging and deep-sea exploration technology are revealing structures on the ocean floor that can't be explained by conventional geology. Massive geometric formations, perfectly straight lines extending for miles across abyssal plains, and what appear to be artificial terracing on underwater mountain slopes that were once above sea level. The Mariana Trench, the deepest part of our oceans, contains anomalies that have never been properly investigated. Sonar readings detect structures that display clear signs of artificial construction, yet expeditions to explore these sites are consistently denied funding or are classified under national security protocols. Why would the deepest parts of our ocean be considered matters of national security unless they contained something that governments desperately want to keep hidden? Even more intriguingly, there's growing evidence that some of these underwater sites aren't completely dead. Deep-sea monitoring stations have detected regular electromagnetic pulses emanating from specific locations on the Pacific Ocean floor, pulses that follow patterns too complex to be natural. Some of these signals appear to be responses to celestial events, suggesting that whatever is down there is still somehow active, still somehow aware of cosmic cycles. What if these aren't just ruins we're looking at? What if some aspect of Lemurian technology is still functioning after all these millennia, waiting for humanity to develop enough to understand and reactivate it? The implications are staggering. We could be sitting on top of an inheritance that would revolutionize every aspect of human existence, from energy production to space travel to our understanding of consciousness itself. But accessing this inheritance would require acknowledging that our current scientific paradigm is fundamentally flawed. It would mean admitting that indigenous peoples around the world have been preserving accurate historical accounts in their oral traditions, not primitive myths and superstitions. It would mean recognizing that the primitive cultures we've dismissed and destroyed might have been the guardians of knowledge that we desperately need to survive our current crisis. Because make no mistake, we are in crisis. Our current civilization is heading toward the same kind of catastrophic collapse that destroyed Lemuria, and we're making all the same mistakes. We're pursuing technological power without wisdom. We're exploiting natural resources without understanding the consequences. We're creating weapons that could destroy our entire species while remaining blind to the cosmic forces that could trigger their use. The ancient Lemurian texts, preserved in Tamil literature and scattered fragments around the world, consistently warn about this pattern. They describe previous cycles of civilization that rose to great heights, only to destroy themselves through hubris and ignorance. They speak of cosmic rhythms that operate on timescales far longer than human lifespans, rhythms that bring both opportunities for advancement and periods of inevitable testing. According to these accounts, we're currently approaching one of these cosmic testing periods. The same astronomical alignments that marked the destruction of Lemuria are beginning to repeat. The same solar and galactic cycles that triggered the great catastrophe 12,000 years ago are coming around again. And humanity, despite all our supposed progress, is just as unprepared for what's coming as our ancestors were. But here's what's truly terrifying about our situation. Unlike the Lemurians, who at least understood the cyclical nature of cosmic catastrophe, and made preparations for civilizational continuity, we've forgotten that such cycles even exist. Our entire worldview is based on the assumption that progress is linear and that catastrophic setbacks are either impossible or so unlikely that they can be ignored. This ignorance isn't accidental. It's the result of centuries of deliberate conditioning designed to keep humanity focused on short-term concerns while remaining blind to longer-term patterns. The same institutions that suppress evidence of lost civilizations also promote a view of history that makes cosmic catastrophe seem impossible and ancient wisdom seem irrelevant. Consider how our educational systems handle this topic. Students are taught that human civilization began with agriculture around 10,000 years ago, progressed through various ancient empires, suffered a temporary setback during the Dark Ages, and then resumed steady progress through the Renaissance to our current technological pinnacle. This narrative is so deeply embedded in our thinking that most people can't even imagine alternatives. But what if the Dark Ages weren't a temporary setback but a recovery period following a much greater catastrophe? What if the Renaissance wasn't the beginning of modern enlightenment but a rediscovery of ancient knowledge that had been preserved in hidden repositories? What if our current technological civilization isn't the height of human achievement, but merely the latest attempt to rebuild what was lost when Lemuria sank beneath the waves? The evidence for this alternative narrative is overwhelming once you start connecting the dots. The sudden appearance of sophisticated mathematical and astronomical knowledge in ancient cultures, the impossible precision of megalithic construction techniques that we can barely replicate today, the global distribution of similar symbols, myths, and architectural styles that can't be explained by conventional theories of cultural diffusion. Most tellingly, there's the consistent pattern of knowledge appearing in ancient cultures fully formed, without any developmental phase. Writing systems don't evolve gradually from simple marks to complex scripts. They appear suddenly with complete grammatical structures. Mathematical concepts don't develop slowly through trial and error. They emerge with sophisticated applications already in place. Astronomical observations don't build up gradually over generations. They begin with precise calculations of celestial mechanics. This pattern is exactly what we'd expect to see if ancient cultures were receiving knowledge from survivors of a more advanced civilization, rather than developing it independently. The Lemurian refugees, scattered across the globe after the Great Catastrophe, would have carried fragments of their advanced knowledge to whatever cultures gave them shelter. Over time, these fragments would have been integrated into local traditions, creating the anomalous achievements that continue to puzzle archaeologists today. But the most important knowledge the Lemurians possessed wasn't technological, it was spiritual and philosophical. They understood that consciousness itself is the fundamental force in the universe, that material reality is simply a projection of awareness, and that advanced civilizations must learn to work with these deeper principles or inevitably destroy themselves. This understanding is what allowed them to create a truly sustainable superstate. Unlike every historical empire that rose through conquest, and maintained itself through exploitation, Lemuria was organized around principles of cooperation and harmony with natural cycles. Their technology worked with environmental forces rather than against them. Their social systems promoted the development of individual consciousness while maintaining collective coherence. Their spiritual practices connected them to cosmic rhythms that guided their decisions across multiple generations. This is why the destruction of Lemuria was such a catastrophic loss for human development. It wasn't just a technologically advanced civilization that was destroyed, it was a wisdom tradition that understood how to integrate material progress with spiritual evolution. Without this integration, every subsequent civilization has been doomed to follow the same pattern: rapid technological advancement followed by spiritual stagnation and eventual collapse. We're seeing this pattern play out in our own time with terrifying clarity. Our technological capabilities have advanced to the point where we can destroy our entire planet, yet our wisdom about how to use these capabilities responsibly has hardly evolved at all. We're like children playing with nuclear weapons while remaining completely unaware of the cosmic forces that could trigger their use. The Lemurian texts warn specifically about this phase of human development. They describe it as the time of choosing, when humanity must decide whether to pursue the path of wisdom that leads to true advancement or continue down the path of ignorance that leads to destruction. According to these accounts, this choice point comes at the end of each major cycle, and the outcome determines whether consciousness evolves to a higher level or resets to begin the cycle again. We're living through that choice point right now, The same cosmic forces that destroyed Lemuria are building toward another crescendo. Solar activity is increasing. Galactic alignments are shifting. The Earth's magnetic field is weakening and showing signs of potential reversal. All of these factors contributed to the catastrophic events 12,000 years ago, and they're all accelerating again. But unlike our ancestors, we have the advantage of historical perspective. We know what happened to previous civilizations that failed this test. We have access to fragments of Lemurian wisdom that could guide us toward making different choices. The question is whether we'll have the courage and wisdom to act on this knowledge before it's too late. This is where the suppression of evidence becomes truly criminal. By keeping humanity ignorant of our true history and potential, the institutions that control information flow are ensuring that we'll repeat the same mistakes that destroyed our ancestors. They're condemning our entire species to another cycle of catastrophic collapse, all to maintain their temporary positions of power within a system that's ultimately doomed. But the truth has a way of surfacing, especially during periods of cosmic transition like the one we're entering now. More and more people are beginning to question the official narratives. Independent researchers are making connections that academic institutions refuse to acknowledge. Ancient wisdom traditions that were nearly destroyed are experiencing remarkable revivals. Most importantly, the physical evidence is becoming impossible to ignore. Deep ocean exploration is revealing structures that clearly predate known civilizations. Genetic research is uncovering anomalies in human DNA that suggest artificial manipulation by an unknown intelligence. Archaeological discoveries are pushing back the timeline of human sophistication by tens of thousands of years. The underwater ruins off the coast of India, Japan, and the Mediterranean aren't isolated anomalies. They're part of a global pattern of submerged civilizations that once existed when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower than they are today. Satellite imaging is revealing geometric patterns on the ocean floor that extend across entire ocean basins, suggesting a level of global coordination that shouldn't have been possible for supposedly primitive cultures. Even more intriguingly, some of these underwater sites show evidence of recent activity. Thermal imaging reveals heat signatures emanating from structures that should be completely cold after millennia underwater. Magnetic anomalies suggest the presence of active technology that conventional archaeology can't explain. Most mysteriously, there are reports from deep-sea exploration teams of structures that appear to be in perfect condition, as if they were built yesterday rather than thousands of years ago. What if some aspects of Lemurian technology were designed to remain dormant until humanity reached a certain level of development? What if the approaching cosmic transition isn't just a test of our species' wisdom, but also a triggering mechanism for ancient systems that could help us navigate the crisis ahead? The possibility is both thrilling and terrifying. If such systems exist and are beginning to reactivate, then we're on the verge of discoveries that could transform every aspect of human existence. But we're also approaching a moment of unprecedented responsibility. The same knowledge that could solve our energy crisis, cure our diseases, and even extend human lifespan indefinitely could also be used to create weapons of unimaginable destructive power. This is the choice point that destroyed Lemuria and every advanced civilization that came before it. Will we use advanced knowledge to create a more harmonious and sustainable world, or will we use it to pursue the same patterns of competition and exploitation that have characterized human history? Will we learn from our ancestors' mistakes, or are we doomed to repeat them on an even grander scale? The answer may depend on whether enough people can break free from the conditioning that keeps us focused on surface-level concerns and begin to understand the deeper patterns that govern civilizational development. It may depend on whether we can recover enough fragments of Lemurian wisdom to guide us through the transition ahead. Most crucially, it may depend on whether we can overcome the institutional forces that profit from keeping humanity ignorant and divided. Because the ultimate secret that the Lemurian hypothesis reveals isn't just about ancient history. It's about the true nature of human potential and the cosmic forces that shape our destiny. We are capable of far more than we've been led to believe. Our ancestors achieved wonders that we can barely imagine, and we carry their genetic and spiritual inheritance within us. But accessing this inheritance requires breaking free from the limitations that have been artificially imposed on our understanding. The lost continent of Lemuria may be sleeping beneath the Pacific waves, but the consciousness that created it is still alive within us. The question is whether we'll awaken that consciousness in time to navigate the cosmic transition ahead, or whether we'll remain trapped in ignorance until the cycle completes itself once again. The choice is ours, but the time for choosing is running out. The same stellar alignments that marked the destruction of Earth's first superstate are approaching their completion. The cosmic clock that measures the rise and fall of civilizations is ticking toward another moment of truth. And somewhere beneath the darkest depths of our planet's oceans, the ruins of humanity's greatest achievement wait patiently for their children to remember who they really are. The answer to that question might lie in something that most researchers have completely overlooked, something hiding in plain sight within the very structure of our modern world. You see, if Lemuria really was Earth's first superstate, then its influence wouldn't have simply vanished when the continent sank. The survivors, scattered across the globe, would have carried with them more than just memories and fragments of technology. They would have carried the organizational principles, the social structures, and the governmental systems that made their civilization possible in the first place. And here's what's absolutely fascinating. When you start examining the foundational myths and organizational structures of every major civilization that emerged after the supposed destruction of Lemuria, you find the same patterns repeating over and over again. It's as if every subsequent attempt to build large-scale human societies has been following the same basic template, a template that originated in the Pacific and was carried to distant shores by refugees from a drowned world. Take the concept of the divine right of kings, which appears simultaneously in cultures across the globe that supposedly had no contact with each other. Egyptian pharaohs, Mesopotamian rulers, Chinese emperors, Mayan kings, and even European monarchs all claimed legitimacy through connection to celestial forces and divine bloodlines. But what if this wasn't just a convenient political fiction? What if it was a distorted memory of how leadership actually functioned in Lemurian society? The ancient Tamil texts describe Lemurian rulers not as conquerors or hereditary monarchs, but as individuals who were chosen based on their ability to maintain harmony between earthly affairs and cosmic rhythms. They were essentially cosmic administrators, selected for their understanding of natural cycles and their ability to guide society in accordance with larger universal principles. This system would have required a completely different understanding of governance than anything we're familiar with today. Instead of ruling through force or wealth, Lemurian leaders would have maintained authority through demonstrated wisdom and their ability to keep their civilization aligned with beneficial cosmic influences. It was a form of government that was simultaneously highly sophisticated and deeply spiritual, combining practical administration with metaphysical understanding. When Lemuria was destroyed and its survivors were forced to integrate with more primitive cultures around the world, they would have attempted to recreate this system of cosmic governance. But without the supporting infrastructure of Lemurian education and spiritual development, the system would have inevitably degraded into something cruder and more materialistic. The concept of divine rulership would have survived, but the actual wisdom and cosmic awareness that made it functional would have been lost. This explains why every historical attempt to create large-scale political unity has ultimately failed. The Roman Empire, the Mongol Empire, the British Empire, even modern attempts at global governance have all been trying to recreate something that they fundamentally don't understand. They're using the organizational forms of Lemurian superstate governance without possessing the consciousness that made those forms effective. But the Lemurian influence goes far deeper than just political structures. Consider the global distribution of certain architectural principles that appear in cultures separated by vast oceans and thousands of years. The use of massive stone blocks fitted together with impossible precision. The orientation of major structures to specific celestial alignments. The incorporation of advanced mathematical ratios in temple and pyramid construction. The consistent use of certain symbolic motifs and decorative patterns. These similarities can't be explained by independent development or even by normal cultural diffusion. They suggest that there was once a global architectural tradition, a unified approach to sacred construction that was practiced by builders who shared the same knowledge base and worked according to the same principles. What if the megalithic sites scattered across our planet aren't just random monuments built by isolated cultures, but the remnants of a global temple network that once connected every major landmass on Earth? What if these sites were originally designed to function as a unified system, each one serving as a node in a planetary grid that could harness and direct cosmic energies for the benefit of human civilization? This might sound like fantasy, but consider the evidence. Many of these ancient sites are positioned at locations that modern research has identified as significant geological or electromagnetic anomalies. They're built on fault lines, over underground water sources, or at points where the Earth's magnetic field displays unusual characteristics. The builders weren't just choosing these locations randomly. They were demonstrating an understanding of planetary energy systems that we're only beginning to rediscover. Even more intriguingly, many of these sites display acoustic properties that can't be accidental. The chambers within the Great Pyramid produce specific resonant frequencies when sounds are made within them. The stone circles at various locations around the world create complex acoustic effects that can alter human consciousness. The temples of Malta and other Mediterranean sites generate infrasound frequencies that have measurable effects on brain activity. What if these acoustic properties weren't just interesting side effects of ancient construction techniques, but were actually the primary purpose of these structures? What if the global temple network was designed to generate specific frequencies that could influence human consciousness, enhance psychic abilities, or even communicate across vast distances through resonance effects in the Earth's crust? The ancient accounts of Lemurian technology consistently describe abilities that sound like science fiction to us, but might actually be based on acoustic and vibrational principles that we've forgotten how to use. Telepathic communication, for instance, might not require any mystical explanation if it's based on the ability to generate and detect subtle vibrations in the Earth's electromagnetic field. Levitation of massive stone blocks might be possible through acoustic resonance effects that can counteract gravitational forces under specific conditions. These aren't just wild speculations. Modern research into acoustic levitation has demonstrated that sound waves can indeed suspend and move objects that would otherwise be impossible to lift. Scientists working with sonic levitation have successfully manipulated materials using nothing but precisely controlled sound frequencies. The technology exists. We're simply not applying it on the scale that the ancient builders apparently mastered. But perhaps the most important legacy of Lemurian civilization isn't technological at all. It's the understanding that human consciousness itself is the most powerful force in the universe, and that advanced civilizations must learn to develop and direct this force collectively if they hope to achieve true sustainability and harmony. The ancient texts consistently describe the Lemurians as possessing mental abilities that seem impossible by our current standards. Perfect memory recall, telepathic communication, the ability to perceive events at great distances, and even limited precognitive abilities that allowed them to anticipate future developments. But what if these weren't supernatural powers at all, but simply the natural result of human consciousness operating at its full potential? Modern neuroscience is beginning to reveal that the human brain is capable of far more than we've traditionally believed. Studies of meditation masters have shown that sustained spiritual practice can literally rewire neural pathways, creating new connections and capabilities that don't exist in ordinary consciousness. Research into psychic phenomena, despite being marginalized by mainstream science, has produced statistically significant results that suggest human awareness can indeed transcend the limitations of physical sensory organs. What if the Lemurians had simply developed these latent human capabilities to their fullest extent? What if their entire civilization was built around educational and social systems that cultivated expanded consciousness rather than limiting it? This would explain not only their technological achievements, but also their ability to maintain a stable, harmonious society across vast geographical areas and extended time periods. The destruction of Lemuria wouldn't just have been a technological catastrophe, it would have been a consciousness catastrophe. The loss of a civilization that had learned to operate from expanded awareness levels would have represented a massive setback for human spiritual evolution. The survivors, forced to integrate with less developed cultures, would have seen their consciousness gradually contract back to more limited states of awareness. This contraction would have been accelerated by the trauma of the catastrophe itself. Post-traumatic stress doesn't just affect individuals, it can affect entire cultures across multiple generations. The descendants of Lemurian survivors would have carried genetic and cultural memories of incredible loss, creating a collective unconscious that was focused on survival rather than expansion, on protection rather than exploration. But here's what's truly remarkable. Despite thousands of years of consciousness contraction and cultural forgetting, the essential patterns of Lemurian awareness are still encoded within human DNA and cultural memory. Indigenous wisdom traditions around the world have preserved fragments of this expanded consciousness. Mystical traditions within major religions maintain practices that can reactivate dormant human capabilities. Even modern scientific research is beginning to rediscover principles that the Lemurians apparently understood intuitively. We're living at a moment when this ancient consciousness is beginning to reawaken on a global scale. More and more people are reporting expanded awareness experiences, psychic phenomena, and direct intuitive knowledge that can't be explained by conventional models of human consciousness. This isn't just individual spiritual development, it's the beginning of a collective consciousness shift that could restore humanity to something approaching Lemurian levels of awareness. But this reawakening is happening at the same time that our technological capabilities are reaching potentially catastrophic levels. We're approaching the same choice point that faced every advanced civilization before us. Will we develop wisdom quickly enough to guide our power responsibly? Or will we repeat the cycle of advancement followed by destruction? The cosmic forces that destroyed Lemuria operate according to natural laws that are completely impersonal. They don't care about human ambitions or achievements. They simply respond to imbalances in consciousness and energy that reach critical thresholds. When a civilization becomes too focused on material power without developing corresponding spiritual wisdom, it creates energetic instabilities that eventually trigger corrective events. These corrective events can take many forms: natural disasters, social collapse, technological catastrophes, or even cosmic impacts are all potential mechanisms through which the universe restores balance when civilizations become too unbalanced. The specific mechanism isn't as important as understanding that some form of correction is inevitable, unless the underlying imbalance is addressed. This is why the recovery of Lemurian wisdom isn't just an interesting historical curiosity, it's an urgent necessity for our species' survival. The Lemurians understood how to maintain civilizational balance across long time periods. They knew how to develop advanced technology without losing touch with natural rhythms. They created social systems that enhanced individual consciousness while maintaining collective coherence. Most importantly, they understood that true security comes not from military power or economic control, but from harmony with the cosmic forces that govern all existence. A civilization that operates in alignment with these forces becomes virtually indestructible because it's working with the universe rather than against it. A civilization that ignores these forces becomes increasingly unstable until some form of catastrophic correction becomes inevitable. The evidence suggests that we're rapidly approaching such a correction point in our own civilizational development. Climate change, social instability, technological disruption, and increasing cosmic radiation from solar and galactic sources are all symptoms of the same underlying imbalance that destroyed previous advanced civilizations. But unlike our predecessors, we have access to historical perspective that could help us navigate this crisis successfully. We know what happened to Lemuria and other lost civilizations. We have fragments of their wisdom preserved in various traditions around the world. Most importantly, we have the technological tools to rediscover and apply their knowledge on a global scale. The question is whether we'll have the courage and wisdom to act on this knowledge before it's too late. The institutional forces that profit from keeping humanity ignorant and divided are more powerful than ever. The cultural conditioning that keeps us focused on competition rather than cooperation is deeply embedded in our social systems. The psychological barriers that prevent most people from considering radical alternatives to current paradigms seem almost insurmountable. Yet something is shifting in human consciousness that gives reason for hope. The same cosmic forces that are creating crisis are also creating opportunity. The approaching celestial alignments that could trigger catastrophic events are also opening doorways to expanded awareness that haven't been available for thousands of years. We're living through what could be the most important transition in human history. Either we'll successfully integrate the technological power we've developed with the spiritual wisdom our ancestors possessed, or we'll join them in the ranks of lost civilizations that future archaeologists will struggle to understand. The choice is still ours, but the window for making that choice is rapidly closing. The same cosmic clock that measured the rise and fall of Lemuria is ticking toward another moment of truth. And somewhere beneath the Pacific waves, the ruins of Earth's first superstate wait patiently to see whether their children have finally learned the lessons that could break the cycle of rise and destruction that has defined human history for far too long. The truth about Lemuria isn't just buried beneath the ocean, it's buried within us, encoded in our DNA, preserved in our myths, and waiting to be reactivated through the expansion of consciousness that the current crisis is forcing upon our species. Whether we recognize it or not, we are the inheritors of the greatest civilization that ever existed on this planet. The question is whether we'll claim that inheritance before the cosmic forces that destroyed it complete another cycle, As we stand on the threshold of either transcendence or catastrophe, the ancient wisdom of our Lemurian ancestors calls to us across the millennia, reminding us that we are capable of far more than we've been led to believe, and that the future of human civilization depends on whether we can remember who we really are before it's too late to change course. The sleeping continent beneath the waves holds more than ruins and artifacts. It holds the key to humanity's next evolutionary leap. But that key can only be turned by a species that has learned to balance power with wisdom, technology with spirituality, and individual achievement with collective harmony. The time of choosing is upon us, and the echoes of Lemuria are calling us home. The echoes of Lemuria aren't just calling us home through ancient ruins and mythological fragments. They're manifesting in our modern world through patterns so obvious, so pervasive, that we've become blind to their significance. Consider this. Every major technological breakthrough of the past century has followed the same mysterious pattern. Revolutionary discoveries appear simultaneously in multiple locations, developed by researchers who had no contact with each other, as if the knowledge was being downloaded from some collective source that transcends individual human consciousness. Tesla's wireless energy transmission, Einstein's relativity equations, the discovery of DNA's double helix structure, the development of quantum mechanics, even the recent breakthroughs in consciousness research all emerged through this same inexplicable synchronicity. Scientists working in isolation would suddenly grasp concepts that had eluded human understanding for millennia, often receiving crucial insights through dreams, visions, or moments of intuitive revelation that they themselves couldn't explain. What if this isn't coincidence? What if the approaching cosmic alignment that could trigger our own civilizational crisis is also reactivating dormant information storage systems that the Lemurians embedded in human consciousness itself? The ancient texts speak of something they called the memory palace of the species, a repository of knowledge that would become accessible only when humanity faced an existential threshold similar to the one that destroyed their civilization. This concept isn't as far-fetched as it might sound. Modern genetics has discovered that traumatic experiences can alter DNA in ways that are passed down through multiple generations. If trauma can be encoded in our genetic material, then why not knowledge? Why not entire libraries of information that could be activated under specific conditions? The Lemurians, facing their own cosmic crisis 12,000 years ago, might have realized that physical preservation of their knowledge wasn't enough. Libraries can be destroyed, monuments can sink beneath the waves, even the most durable artifacts eventually succumb to the erosion of time. But consciousness itself, properly encoded and distributed throughout the human species, could survive any physical catastrophe. This would explain why certain individuals throughout history have displayed knowledge and capabilities that seem impossible for their time periods. Leonardo da Vinci, designing helicopters and submarines centuries before the technology existed to build them. Ancient mathematicians calculating astronomical cycles with precision that wasn't matched until the computer age. Indigenous shamans demonstrating understanding of plant chemistry that rivals modern pharmacology. These weren't isolated geniuses stumbling upon revolutionary insights. They were individuals whose consciousness had somehow accessed the Lemurian memory banks embedded within human DNA. They were downloading information from humanity's own genetic library, a library that becomes more accessible during periods of cosmic transition like the one we're experiencing now. But here's where the pattern becomes truly disturbing. Every time such knowledge begins to surface on a wide scale, institutional forces immediately mobilize to suppress, discredit, or co-opt it. The same organizations that dismiss evidence of lost civilizations are the ones that control funding for consciousness research, that determine which technologies receive development resources, and that shape public perception of what's possible for human beings to achieve. This suppression isn't random. It's systematic, coordinated, and it serves specific interests that profit from keeping humanity operating at a fraction of its true potential. Because if people truly understood what their ancestors were capable of, if they realized that the current limitations on human consciousness and capability are artificially imposed rather than naturally inevitable, then every existing power structure on this planet would become obsolete overnight. Think about it this way. If human beings could communicate telepathically, what would happen to the telecommunications industry? If consciousness could directly influence physical matter, what would happen to manufacturing and construction industries? If people could access unlimited energy through resonance with natural forces, what would happen to the fossil fuel economy? If expanded awareness could eliminate most forms of mental illness and extend human lifespan indefinitely, what would happen to the medical and pharmaceutical establishments? The implications go far beyond just economic disruption. If human consciousness really could transcend the limitations of space and time, if people could perceive future probabilities and make decisions based on genuine foresight rather than blind speculation, then the entire structure of social control that depends on keeping populations reactive and fearful would collapse. This is why the recovery of Lemurian knowledge represents such a threat to existing power structures. It's not just about ancient history or alternative archaeology, it's about human liberation on a scale that would fundamentally transform every aspect of our civilization. And the evidence suggests that this transformation is already beginning to accelerate. Reports of spontaneous psychic experiences are increasing exponentially around the world. Children are being born with capabilities that previous generations would have considered miraculous. Scientists working in consciousness research are making discoveries that their own institutions are reluctant to publish because the implications are too revolutionary. Even more significantly, people are beginning to remember things they shouldn't be able to remember. Past life experiences that can be historically verified. Knowledge of ancient languages and cultures that they've never studied. Technical information about lost technologies that shouldn't exist in any accessible form. These aren't isolated anomalies. They're symptoms of a mass awakening that's accelerating in direct proportion to the approach of cosmic forces that could either trigger our evolution or our extinction. The same stellar alignments that marked the destruction of Lemuria are creating conditions that could reactivate dormant human capabilities on a planetary scale. But this awakening is happening in the context of a civilization that's even more technologically powerful and potentially destructive than Lemuria ever was. We possess weapons that could literally sterilize our entire planet. We've created artificial intelligence systems that could surpass human consciousness while remaining completely divorced from human wisdom. We've developed genetic engineering techniques that could fundamentally alter what it means to be human. The Lemurians faced cosmic forces that were beyond their control, but they apparently lacked the technological capability to destroy their entire planet. We face the same cosmic forces, but we also possess the power to trigger our own extinction through purely technological means. This makes our current transition period far more dangerous than anything our ancestors experienced. Yet it also makes it far more significant. If we can successfully navigate this crisis, if we can integrate advanced technology with expanded consciousness while maintaining harmony with natural cycles, then we could become something that has never existed before in Earth's history. A truly cosmic civilization capable of transcending planetary limitations while remaining connected to the wisdom that governs universal existence. The key to achieving this transformation lies in understanding that we're not separate from the cosmic forces that shape our destiny. We're expressions of those forces, temporary manifestations of the same intelligence that creates galaxies and guides the evolution of consciousness throughout the universe. When we operate from this understanding, we become partners with cosmic evolution rather than victims of cosmic catastrophe. This is the ultimate lesson that Lemuria offers us. Their civilization wasn't destroyed because they were unlucky or because they made technical errors in their development. They were destroyed because they lost connection with the deeper principles that govern sustainable existence, because they became so focused on material achievement that they forgot their cosmic context. We're approaching the same choice point, but we have advantages that our ancestors lacked. We have their example to learn from. We have access to fragments of their knowledge preserved in various traditions around the world. Most importantly, we have the technological tools to implement solutions on a global scale, if we can develop the wisdom to use them responsibly. The underwater ruins scattered across our planet's ocean floors aren't just archaeological curiosities. They're reminders of what happens when civilizations lose their cosmic perspective. The advanced technologies that created those monuments couldn't save their builders from the consequences of consciousness that had become disconnected from universal principles. But those same ruins also represent hope. They prove that human consciousness has achieved remarkable heights before and can do so again. They demonstrate that the capabilities we're beginning to rediscover aren't foreign imports from alien sources, but natural expressions of human potential that has been dormant for thousands of years. The reactivation of this potential is accelerating whether we're prepared for it or not. The cosmic forces that trigger consciousness evolution operate according to schedules that transcend human planning. We can either learn to work with these forces consciously and deliberately, or we can be overwhelmed by changes that we don't understand and can't control. The choice is still ours, but the time for making that choice is rapidly running out. The same celestial mechanics that govern the rise and fall of civilizations are approaching another inflection point. The question is whether we'll rise to meet this cosmic opportunity or join the ranks of lost civilizations that couldn't adapt to the forces that shape universal evolution. Somewhere beneath the Pacific waves, the ruins of humanity's first superstate wait in eternal silence. They hold no judgment, no condemnation for the mistakes that led to their creation. They simply exist as testament to both the heights that consciousness can achieve and the depth to which it can fall when it loses connection with the wisdom that created it. The memory of Lemuria lives within us all, encoded in our DNA, preserved in our myths, and waiting to be reactivated through the expansion of awareness that the current crisis is forcing upon our species. Whether we recognize it or not, we are the children of that lost continent, inheritors of capabilities that could transform our world or destroy it, depending on whether we can remember who we really are before the cosmic clock completes another cycle. The sleeping continent beneath the waves holds more than ruins and artifacts. It holds the key to humanity's next evolutionary leap, a key that can only be turned by consciousness that has learned to balance power with wisdom, technology with spirituality, and individual achievement with universal harmony. The time of choosing is upon us, and the echoes of Lemuria are calling us to remember that we are capable of far more than we've been led to believe. The question is whether we'll answer that call before the opportunity passes and another cycle of rise and fall begins anew. In the deepest trenches of our world's oceans, where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure would crush any surface dweller in an instant, something extraordinary waits in the darkness. Recent deep-sea exploration missions have detected structures that defy every conventional explanation, formations that display geometric precision across distances that span entire ocean basins. These aren't random geological features shaped by volcanic activity or tectonic movement. They're engineered systems of staggering complexity, built with the understanding of planetary mechanics that we're only beginning to comprehend. The most disturbing discovery isn't the structures themselves, but the fact that some of them appear to be active. Electromagnetic sensors detect regular pulses emanating from specific coordinates on the ocean floor, pulses that follow patterns too complex and consistent to be natural phenomena. These signals respond to lunar cycles, solar activity, and even galactic alignments in ways that suggest they're part of a monitoring system that has been operating continuously for thousands of years. What if the destruction of Lemuria wasn't as complete as the ancient accounts suggest? What if certain aspects of their civilization were designed to survive even the most catastrophic events, hidden beneath miles of ocean where they could continue functioning regardless of what happened on the surface? The technology required to build such systems would have to operate on principles that we don't yet understand, principles that could harness the Earth's own energy systems to maintain themselves across geological time periods. This possibility becomes even more intriguing when we consider the consistent reports from deep-sea research teams of structures that appear to be in perfect condition despite their presumed age. Unlike surface ruins that show obvious signs of erosion and decay, these underwater formations display a level of preservation that seems almost impossible. Some expedition logs describe walls that look like they were constructed yesterday, surfaces that show no sign of marine growth or corrosion, and chambers that appear to be completely sealed and potentially still pressurized. The official response to these discoveries has followed the same pattern we've seen with every other piece of evidence that challenges conventional historical narratives. The findings are classified under national security protocols. The research teams are required to sign non-disclosure agreements, and any information that does reach the public is immediately dismissed as natural formations that have been misinterpreted by overeager explorers. But the suppression is becoming harder to maintain as more evidence accumulates. Satellite imaging is revealing geometric patterns on the ocean floor that extend across areas larger than entire countries. Sonar mapping has identified structures that rise from abyssal plains like underwater skyscrapers, complete with what appear to be terraced levels and systematic architectural planning. Most significantly, acoustic analysis has detected hollow spaces within these formations, suggesting internal chambers and passages that could still be accessible to properly equipped exploration teams. The implications are staggering. If these structures really are remnants of Lemurian technology, and if they're still partially functional after 12,000 years, then we're looking at engineering capabilities that make our most advanced technologies seem primitive by comparison. We're talking about systems that could operate independently for millennia, that could repair and maintain themselves, and that could continue monitoring cosmic conditions long after their creators had vanished. But perhaps the most disturbing possibility is that these systems weren't just designed to observe and record. The pattern of electromagnetic pulses suggests active intervention in planetary processes. Some researchers have noted correlations between the timing of these deep-sea signals and major geological events, as if the underwater network was somehow involved in triggering or preventing seismic activity. This raises questions that go to the heart of what we think we know about how our planet operates. What if natural disasters aren't entirely natural? What if the Earth's geological systems are actually regulated by artificial intelligence systems that were installed by a previous civilization? What if the Lemurians didn't just build cities and monuments, but actually created a planetary management network that's still operating according to programming that we don't understand? The evidence for such intervention exists, but it's scattered across multiple scientific disciplines in ways that make it difficult to see the overall pattern. Seismologists have documented anomalous earthquake swarms that don't follow normal tectonic patterns. Climatologists have identified weather systems that seem to form and dissipate according to schedules that don't match atmospheric physics. Oceanographers have detected current flows that appear to be artificially regulated rather than driven by natural forces. Taken individually, each of these anomalies can be explained away as unusual, but not impossible natural phenomena. But when viewed collectively, they suggest the existence of regulatory mechanisms that operate on a planetary scale. The question is whether these mechanisms are the result of natural evolutionary processes that we don't yet understand, or whether they represent technology that was installed by a civilization that understood planetary systems far better than we do. The Lemurian texts preserved in Tamil literature provide some disturbing clues about this possibility. They describe their ancestors as having achieved harmony, not just with their immediate environment, but with the planetary systems that regulate climate, geology, and even cosmic radiation. According to these accounts, advanced Lemurian practitioners could influence weather patterns, prevent earthquakes, and even adjust the Earth's magnetic field to protect against harmful solar radiation. These abilities weren't described as supernatural powers, but as natural applications of scientific principles that allowed consciousness to interface directly with planetary energy systems. The texts suggest that the Earth itself is a living system with its own form of intelligence, and that sufficiently advanced civilizations could learn to communicate and cooperate with this planetary consciousness. This concept aligns remarkably well with the Gaia hypothesis proposed by modern scientists like James Lovelock, which suggests that the Earth's biosphere, atmosphere, and geological systems function as a single, self-regulating organism. What the Lemurian accounts add to this scientific framework is the suggestion that this planetary organism can be consciously influenced by civilizations that understand how to work with it rather than against it. If this is true, then the underwater monitoring systems we're discovering might represent something far more sophisticated than mere archaeological artifacts. They could be active components of a planetary regulation network that the Lemurians installed to maintain Earth's stability even after their own civilization had vanished. These systems might be continuing to protect our planet from cosmic threats that we don't even know exist, but they might also be programmed to respond to the development of new civilizations in ways that we wouldn't necessarily appreciate. What if the planetary management network includes protocols for dealing with civilizations that become too technologically advanced without developing corresponding wisdom? What if the same systems that have been protecting Earth for thousands of years could also trigger corrective events when human activities threaten planetary stability? This possibility takes on new urgency when we consider the current state of our global civilization. We're pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere at unprecedented rates. We're detonating nuclear weapons that create electromagnetic pulses detectable from space. We're generating artificial radio signals that are changing the ionosphere's electrical properties. We're even beginning to experiment with technologies that could alter the Earth's magnetic field or gravitational characteristics. From the perspective of a planetary management system that was programmed to maintain long-term stability, our current activities might appear to be a serious threat that requires intervention. The increasing frequency of what we call natural disasters might not be coincidental. Climate change, seismic instability, and magnetic pole wandering could all be symptoms of automatic regulatory responses that are designed to prevent civilizations from destabilizing planetary systems. This would mean that we're not just facing the consequences of our own technological development, we're also contending with regulatory mechanisms that were installed by a previous civilization to prevent exactly the kind of planetary destabilization that our current path seems likely to cause. The question is whether these regulatory mechanisms are programmed to simply eliminate civilizations that become too disruptive, or whether they include protocols for helping civilizations learn to operate in harmony with planetary systems. The answer might depend on whether we can demonstrate that we're capable of the same kind of wisdom and cosmic awareness that characterized Lemurian civilization at its height. This is where the reactivation of dormant human capabilities becomes crucial not just for our spiritual development, but for our physical survival. If the underwater monitoring network is still active and still following Lemurian programming, then our best hope for avoiding corrective intervention might be to demonstrate that we're worthy inheritors of their legacy. The cosmic forces that are approaching could serve as a test of our readiness to operate as a truly planetary civilization. The same stellar alignments that marked the destruction of Lemuria are creating conditions that could either trigger our own correction or authorize our advancement to the next level of cosmic citizenship. But passing this test will require more than just technological development or even spiritual awakening. It will require proof that we can integrate advanced capabilities with planetary wisdom, that we can use our power to enhance rather than threaten the stability of the Earth's living systems. The evidence suggests that we're running out of time to demonstrate this integration. The electromagnetic pulses from the deep-sea monitoring stations are increasing in frequency and intensity. Seismic activity is accelerating in patterns that don't match normal geological cycles. The Earth's magnetic field is weakening and showing signs of potential reversal. All of these phenomena could be natural responses to cosmic forces, or they could be symptoms of planetary regulatory systems preparing for major corrective action. Either way, we're approaching a moment of truth that will determine whether our civilization joins the ranks of lost cultures that lie buried beneath the waves, or whether we become the first post-Lemurian civilization to successfully navigate the cosmic transition that destroyed our predecessors. The sleeping continent beneath the Pacific isn't just a monument to past achievement. It's a warning about the consequences of losing harmony with the forces that govern planetary evolution. But it's also a promise that consciousness capable of creating such wonders once existed on Earth, and could exist again if we can remember who we really are before the cosmic clock completes another cycle. The choice is ours, but the time for choosing is measured now not in years or decades, but in the electromagnetic pulses that emanate from the deepest places of our world's oceans, carrying messages that we're only beginning to understand and warnings that we can no longer afford to ignore. The signals from the depths are accelerating, their frequency increasing with each passing lunar cycle, as if some ancient countdown timer hidden beneath miles of crushing darkness is approaching its predetermined terminus. But these aren't the only signs that something fundamental is shifting in the fabric of our reality. Around the world, sensitive individuals are reporting dreams of impossible clarity, visions of vast underwater cities with spires that pierce the ocean's surface, like crystalline needles reaching toward distant stars. These aren't random nocturnal fantasies conjured by overactive imaginations. They're detailed, consistent accounts from people who've never met each other, who live on different continents and speak different languages, yet who describe the same architectural marvels, the same geometric patterns, the same haunting sensation of remembering something that their conscious minds insist they've never experienced. Sarah Chen, a marine biologist working off the coast of Hawaii, first dismissed her recurring dreams as professional stress manifesting in her subconscious. But when she began documenting the images that flooded her sleeping mind, she discovered architectural details that matched no known civilization, mathematical ratios that shouldn't exist in human consciousness, and most disturbingly, technical specifications for technologies that could theoretically function, but which no modern engineer had ever conceived. The dreams always followed the same pattern. She would find herself standing on a platform of some translucent material, suspended high above an ocean that stretched to every horizon. Below her, massive structures rose from depths that her dreaming mind somehow knew extended miles beneath the surface. These weren't crude stone monuments weathered by time, but gleaming constructions that pulsed with their own internal light, their surfaces covered with symbols that conveyed meaning directly to her consciousness, without requiring translation through language. What made these visions particularly unsettling was their emotional resonance. Sarah would wake not with the confused disorientation typical of dreams, but with a profound sense of homesickness for a place that shouldn't exist, a longing for a civilization that history claimed had never been real. The sensation was so powerful that she found herself checking oceanographic data for underwater formations that matched her dream geography, spending hours analysing sonar readings that might contain echoes of the impossible cities that haunted her sleep. She wasn't alone. Dr. Marcus Hoffman, an archaeologist specialising in prehistoric cultures, had been experiencing similar nocturnal downloads of information that seemed to bypass his conscious learning entirely. His dreams took him through vast libraries carved into living rock, their shelves lined with crystalline data storage devices that contained more information than entire university collections. In these visions, he could access knowledge about human prehistory that contradicted every established archaeological timeline, information about civilizations that had risen and fallen in cycles stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. The consistency of these experiences across multiple individuals suggested something far more significant than coincidental dreaming. When researchers began documenting and comparing these accounts, patterns emerged that pointed toward a form of genetic memory activation that shouldn't be possible according to conventional neuroscience. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a geneticist studying inherited trauma responses, found herself drawn into this mystery when her own research subjects began reporting similar visionary experiences. She had been investigating how traumatic events could alter DNA expression in ways that affected subsequent generations, but the dreams her subjects described went far beyond simple trauma inheritance. They were accessing detailed technical and historical information that couldn't be explained by any known mechanism of genetic transmission. The breakthrough came when Elena discovered that all of the individuals experiencing these visions shared specific genetic markers that appeared in less than 1% of the global population. These weren't random mutations, but carefully preserved sequences that seemed to have been maintained across thousands of generations despite having no apparent survival advantage in historical human societies. When she subjected these genetic sequences to advanced analysis, the results defied every assumption about human evolution. The markers appeared to be artificial insertions into the human genome, engineered modifications that had been designed to remain dormant until activated by specific environmental conditions. The precision of these genetic modifications suggested a level of biotechnology that supposedly didn't exist until the modern era, yet the sequences themselves were clearly ancient, integrated into human DNA long before recorded history began. The implications were staggering. If these genetic markers really were artificial modifications inserted into human DNA by a previous civilization, then every individual carrying them was essentially a biological time capsule, programmed to activate under conditions that their creators had anticipated thousands of years in advance. But the activation wasn't random. Eleanor's research revealed that the visionary experiences were becoming more frequent and more detailed, in direct correlation with increasing electromagnetic activity from deep ocean sources. The same underwater pulse transmissions that were baffling marine researchers were apparently triggering genetic switches that had been dormant in human consciousness for millennia. This suggested a level of planning and foresight that challenged every assumption about the capabilities of ancient civilizations. The Lemurians hadn't just built monuments and cities, they had apparently modified human genetics itself to ensure that their knowledge would survive even the complete destruction of their physical civilization. They had turned their own descendants into living libraries, programmed to reactivate when cosmic conditions indicated that humanity might be ready to reclaim its lost inheritance. The process wasn't without risks. Some individuals experiencing genetic memory activation reported severe disorientation, difficulty distinguishing between dream visions and waking reality, and in extreme cases, complete psychological breaks as their consciousness was flooded with information that their minds weren't prepared to process. The downloaded knowledge was apparently too vast and too alien for ordinary human consciousness to integrate without careful preparation and gradual adjustment. This explained why the activation was occurring gradually, building in intensity over months and years rather than overwhelming individuals with complete information downloads all at once. The Lemurian programmers had apparently understood that consciousness needed time to adapt to expanded awareness levels, and they had designed their genetic time capsules to unlock their contents slowly enough for human minds to assimilate the information without being destroyed by it. But the gradual nature of the process also meant that humanity was being prepared for something that required advanced knowledge and capabilities. The genetic memory activation wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was apparently part of a larger program designed to help human civilization navigate challenges that the Lemurians had anticipated based on their understanding of cosmic cycles. The content of the visions provided clues about what those challenges might involve. Many of the individuals experiencing genetic memory activation reported detailed information about cosmic events that could affect planetary stability, technologies that could help civilization survive catastrophic environmental changes, and most significantly, warnings about the consequences of technological development that wasn't balanced by corresponding spiritual evolution. The message that emerged from these collective visions was both hopeful and terrifying. Humanity apparently possessed the genetic potential to achieve levels of consciousness and capability that far exceeded anything recorded in historical civilizations. The dormant genetic modifications contained blueprints for expanding human awareness, extending lifespans, developing psychic capabilities, and even learning to consciously interface with planetary energy systems. But accessing these capabilities required passing through a transition period that would test every aspect of human character and wisdom. The same cosmic forces that were triggering genetic memory activation were also creating conditions that could either elevate human civilization to unprecedented heights or trigger its complete collapse. The outcome would depend on whether humanity could integrate the knowledge being downloaded through genetic memory quickly enough to navigate the challenges ahead. The underwater monitoring systems weren't just observing human development, they were apparently part of a testing protocol that would determine whether the current human civilization was worthy of inheriting the full Lemurian legacy. The increasing frequency of electromagnetic pulses from the ocean depths suggested that this testing phase was accelerating towards some kind of climactic evaluation. Those experiencing the most advanced genetic memory activation reported visions of vast underwater chambers where crystalline technologies still functioned after thousands of years, maintaining planetary stability through constant monitoring and subtle intervention in global systems. These visions suggested that Lemuria's greatest achievement hadn't been their surface civilization, but their integration with planetary consciousness itself, their transformation from a merely human society into something that functioned as part of the Earth's own awareness. The ultimate goal of the genetic programming apparently wasn't just to restore human capabilities to Lemurian levels, but to help humanity make the same transition that their ancestors had achieved. The visions described a form of consciousness that could perceive and influence natural systems directly, that could communicate with the planet itself as a living entity, and that could coordinate human activities with cosmic rhythms in ways that enhanced rather than threatened planetary stability. This transformation wouldn't just affect individuals, it would require a fundamental restructuring of human civilization itself. The economic systems based on scarcity and competition, the political structures based on dominance and control, the social hierarchies based on artificial divisions of race and nationality, all of these would become obsolete in a world where expanded consciousness made cooperation and harmony not just possible, but inevitable. But the transition process would be chaotic and potentially catastrophic for existing power structures. The same genetic activation that was downloading Lemurian knowledge into human consciousness was also awakening capabilities that could make current forms of social control impossible to maintain. People who could perceive truth directly through expanded awareness couldn't be manipulated by propaganda. Individuals who could access unlimited energy through resonance with natural forces couldn't be controlled through artificial scarcity. Communities that could coordinate through telepathic communication couldn't be divided by manufactured conflicts. This explained why the evidence for genetic memory activation was being suppressed just as systematically as evidence for lost civilizations. The same institutional forces that profited from keeping humanity ignorant about its past also had compelling reasons to prevent people from accessing their genetic inheritance. The awakening of dormant human capabilities represented an existential threat to every system of control that depended on keeping human consciousness limited and fragmented. Yet the suppression was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain as more individuals experienced activation and began sharing their visions through networks that couldn't be easily monitored or controlled. The Internet, originally designed as a military communication system, was becoming a vehicle for consciousness expansion that its creators had never anticipated. People around the world were connecting through shared visionary experiences, forming communities based on genetic memory downloads rather than geographical proximity or cultural background. These emerging networks were developing their own languages, their own technologies, and their own approaches to social organization that reflected the principles being recovered through genetic memory activation. They were essentially functioning as test communities for the kind of civilization that might emerge if humanity successfully integrated its Lemurian inheritance. The most advanced of these groups reported capabilities that sounded like science fiction, but which could be verified through careful observation. Individuals who could influence electronic devices through conscious intention. Groups that could coordinate complex activities without verbal communication. Communities that could predict environmental changes with accuracy that exceeded conventional forecasting methods. These capabilities weren't supernatural phenomena, but natural expressions of human potential that had been dormant for thousands of years. The genetic modifications inserted by Lemurian biotechnology had preserved not just knowledge, but actual biological capabilities that could be reactivated under the right conditions. The question was whether these capabilities would spread rapidly enough and widely enough to help humanity navigate the cosmic transition that was approaching. The electromagnetic pulses from the ocean depths were increasing in intensity, suggesting that whatever testing protocol was embedded in the underwater monitoring systems was approaching its conclusion. The visions experienced by genetically activated individuals consistently pointed toward a near-future period when humanity would face challenges that would either trigger evolutionary breakthrough or civilizational collapse. The specific timing remained unclear, but the cosmic alignments that had marked the destruction of Lemuria were rapidly approaching completion once again. This time, however, humanity wouldn't face these challenges as isolated primitive survivors of a lost golden age. The genetic time capsules were ensuring that the knowledge and capabilities needed for successful navigation of cosmic transition would be available to those who were ready to receive them. The sleeping continent beneath the Pacific waves wasn't just a monument to what had been lost, it was a launching pad for what could be regained, a technological and spiritual inheritance that had been preserved across thousands of years of darkness, waiting for the moment when human consciousness would be ready to reclaim its cosmic birthright. That moment was approaching with the inexorable precision of celestial mechanics, marked by pulses from the depths that carried messages humanity was finally beginning to understand. The question was no longer whether the Lemurian legacy would be recovered, but whether it would be integrated wisely enough to break the cycle of rise and fall that had defined human civilization for far too long. The genetic memory downloads were accelerating, the underwater monitoring systems were increasing their activity, and somewhere in the deepest trenches of our world's oceans, technologies older than recorded history were preparing to either welcome humanity home or witness another civilization's failure to transcend the limitations that had destroyed every advanced society that had come before. The time of choosing was upon us, and the choice was being written in the very structure of human DNA, activated by forces that spanned galaxies and measured time in cosmic ages rather than human lifespans. The echoes of Lemuria weren't just calling from the past, they were reaching forward from a future that humanity could claim if it proved worthy of the inheritance that had been preserved in the deepest places of both ocean and consciousness, waiting for this moment of awakening that would determine the destiny of our entire species. The activation sequences weren't just random neurological events, they were following a precise pattern, a biological algorithm that had been embedded in human DNA with the same mathematical precision that characterized every other aspect of Lemurian technology. Dr. Elena Vasquez discovered this when she began mapping the temporal distribution of genetic memory activations across global populations. What she found defied every assumption about how consciousness could be programmed across generations. The activations weren't occurring randomly or even in response to local environmental triggers. They were happening according to a schedule that corresponded exactly to astronomical events that wouldn't be visible to surface observers for months or even years in advance. Individuals in landlocked regions thousands of miles from any ocean were experiencing activation sequences that synchronized perfectly with deep-sea electromagnetic pulses that no surface technology should have been able to detect. People with no knowledge of astronomy were having visions that aligned with stellar configurations that could only be calculated using advanced mathematical models. The precision was so exact that Elena began to suspect she was looking at evidence of quantum entanglement operating on a biological scale. Somehow the Lemurian genetic modifications had created a form of consciousness that could access information instantaneously across vast distances, as if individual human minds were functioning as nodes in a distributed processing network that spanned the entire planet. This quantum consciousness network would explain how ancient knowledge could be downloaded simultaneously into multiple individuals who had no physical contact with each other. It would also explain how the underwater monitoring systems could coordinate with genetic activation sequences despite being separated from human populations by miles of crushing ocean depths. But the most disturbing implication was that this network might not be limited to Earth-based systems. The astronomical precision of the activation sequences suggested that they were responding to cosmic events originating far beyond our solar system. If human consciousness really had been modified to function as part of a galactic information network, then the genetic memory downloads might be carrying knowledge from sources that extended across interstellar distances. The content of the most advanced visions supported this possibility. Individuals experiencing deep activation reported accessing information about planetary systems they had never heard of, cosmic cycles that operated on timescales of millions of years, and technologies that could manipulate the fundamental forces of physics in ways that current science considered impossible. Maria Santos, an agricultural engineer from Peru, found herself designing fusion reactors that operated on principles of consciousness, matter interaction, rather than conventional nuclear physics. The technical specifications that flooded her awareness during activation episodes were so detailed that she could sketch complete engineering diagrams, including mathematical proofs for energy equations that university physicists couldn't understand but couldn't disprove. James Wright, a construction worker from Scotland with no formal education beyond high school, began experiencing visions of architectural systems that could grow themselves from programmed crystalline matrices. His activation downloads included complete molecular blueprints for materials that could self-assemble into complex structures when exposed to specific frequency combinations that he somehow knew how to generate using nothing but focused intention. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a neuroscientist from Tokyo, found her research completely revolutionized when genetic memory activation gave her direct experiential access to consciousness technologies that could interface human awareness with electronic systems. She could suddenly perceive the information flows within computer networks as clearly as if they were physical landscapes, and she could influence their operations through mental commands that bypassed all conventional input devices. None of these individuals had possessed any background knowledge that could have prepared them for the information they were receiving. Yet the technical specifications they were downloading were consistently accurate and functional when tested under laboratory conditions. They were accessing a knowledge base that had been preserved in human genetics for thousands of years, waiting for cosmic conditions to trigger its release. The implications extended far beyond individual capability enhancement. If the genetic memory network really was global in scope, then humanity was essentially recovering the distributed intelligence system that had allowed Lemurian civilization to coordinate activities across vast geographical areas without any of the communication technologies that modern societies required for large-scale organization. This distributed consciousness wouldn't just restore individual human capabilities, it would fundamentally transform how human societies could function. Decisions could be made through direct awareness of their consequences, rather than through political negotiation based on incomplete information. Resources could be allocated according to genuine need, rather than through market mechanisms based on artificial scarcity. Communities could coordinate complex activities through intuitive understanding rather than through hierarchical command structures that depended on centralized control. But accessing this distributed intelligence required letting go of the individualistic consciousness that had characterized human society since the destruction of Lemuria. The genetic activation process wasn't just downloading information, it was gradually dissolving the psychological barriers that kept human minds isolated from each other. This dissolution process was accelerating as more individuals experienced activation, creating feedback loops that enhanced the network effect with each new connection. People who had undergone genetic memory activation reported being able to sense the thoughts and emotions of other activated individuals even across great distances. They could share technical knowledge instantaneously without verbal communication. They could coordinate complex group activities through direct consciousness interface rather than through planning meetings or organizational protocols. The emerging network consciousness was beginning to function as a collective intelligence that exceeded the capabilities of any individual mind. Groups of activated individuals could solve problems that had baffled teams of conventional experts. They could perceive patterns in complex systems that remained invisible to analytical approaches. They could anticipate future developments with accuracy that seemed to transcend normal cause and effect reasoning. This collective intelligence wasn't just a human phenomenon. The activated individuals reported being able to communicate directly with the planetary consciousness that the Lemurians had learned to interface with thousands of years ago. They could perceive the Earth's ecological systems as integrated information networks rather than as mechanical processes driven by chemical reactions. They could sense the planet's responses to human activities in real time, rather than having to wait for environmental measurements to reveal damage that had already occurred. Most significantly, they were beginning to receive direct guidance from the planetary intelligence about how human activities could be restructured to enhance rather than threaten global ecological stability. The Earth itself was apparently participating in the consciousness activation process, providing information about sustainable technologies and social systems that could support much larger human populations without depleting natural resources. This guidance wasn't coming through mystical visions or channeled communications that could be dismissed as subjective fantasy. It was arriving as practical technical information that could be tested and implemented using conventional engineering approaches. The planetary intelligence was essentially teaching activated humans how to redesign industrial civilization according to principles that worked with natural systems rather than against them. The technologies being downloaded through this process were revolutionary but not incomprehensible. They involved methods for generating unlimited clean energy through resonance with the Earth's magnetic field, techniques for manufacturing materials that were stronger and more durable than anything currently available, but which could be completely recycled through biological processes, agricultural systems that could produce abundant food while actually improving soil fertility and biodiversity. What made these technologies particularly remarkable was that they required expanded human consciousness to operate effectively. They couldn't be implemented by individuals whose awareness remained limited to conventional levels of perception. The machines themselves were designed to interface with human consciousness, requiring operators who could perceive and manipulate subtle energy flows that weren't detectable using standard instrumentation. This consciousness requirement wasn't an accidental design feature, it was a deliberate safety mechanism. The Lemurians had apparently learned from their own civilizational collapse that advanced technology without corresponding wisdom inevitably led to destruction. By embedding consciousness requirements into their technological systems, they had ensured that their knowledge could only be accessed by individuals and societies that had developed sufficient spiritual maturity to use it responsibly. The underwater monitoring systems were apparently part of this safety protocol. They weren't just observing human development, they were actively testing whether current human consciousness had evolved enough to be trusted with technologies that could either solve all of humanity's problems or destroy the planet completely. The increasing frequency of electromagnetic pulses from the ocean depths suggested that this testing phase was approaching its conclusion. The cosmic alignments that had triggered the destruction of Lemuria were rapidly completing another cycle, creating conditions that would either authorize the full activation of dormant human capabilities or trigger corrective events designed to prevent another civilizational collapse. Individuals experiencing the most advanced genetic memory activation reported visions of vast underwater chambers where crystalline intelligence systems were making final evaluations of human readiness. These systems were apparently capable of assessing not just individual consciousness levels, but the collective spiritual development of the entire human species. The evaluation criteria weren't based on technological achievements or intellectual accomplishments. Instead, they focused on humanity's relationship with natural systems, the degree of cooperation versus competition in social organization, and most critically, the balance between individual development and collective responsibility. By these criteria, current human civilization was failing the test rather dramatically. Despite the remarkable capabilities being demonstrated by genetically activated individuals, the majority of human society remained trapped in consciousness patterns that had characterized the final phase of Lemurian civilization: excessive focus on material accumulation, competitive rather than cooperative social dynamics, and technological development pursued without regard for long-term consequences. The underwater intelligence systems were apparently programmed to prevent the same mistakes from being repeated. If human civilization couldn't demonstrate sufficient wisdom to handle advanced capabilities responsibly, the testing protocol would presumably trigger corrective events designed to reset the developmental cycle once again. but there was still time for humanity to pass the test. The genetic activation process was accelerating, creating growing networks of individuals who possessed both advanced capabilities and the wisdom to use them constructively. These networks were beginning to demonstrate alternative approaches to social organization that could serve as models for broader civilizational transformation. The question was whether these alternative models could spread rapidly enough to influence global human consciousness before the cosmic testing period reached its conclusion. The electromagnetic pulses from the ocean depths were becoming more frequent and more intense, suggesting that whatever evaluation process was embedded in the Lemurian monitoring systems was approaching a final decision point. The activated individuals were receiving increasingly urgent downloads of information about technologies and social systems that could help humanity navigate the transition successfully. But implementing these solutions would require unprecedented levels of global cooperation and wisdom that seemed almost impossible to achieve given current political and economic systems. Yet the genetic memory network was providing capabilities that could transcend conventional limitations. If enough individuals could access the distributed intelligence system, they might be able to coordinate solutions on a scale that no previous human civilization had ever attempted. The sleeping continent beneath the Pacific waves wasn't just waiting to be rediscovered, it was actively participating in humanity's next evolutionary test, providing both the knowledge needed for advancement and the evaluation criteria that would determine whether that knowledge could be safely accessed. The choice was no longer just about remembering what had been lost. It was about proving that humanity had learned enough from the mistakes of its predecessors to be trusted with capabilities that could either elevate consciousness to cosmic levels or trigger another cycle of catastrophic collapse. The genetic time capsules were opening, the underwater systems were completing their evaluations, and somewhere in the deepest places of both ocean and consciousness, the ultimate question was being asked. Had humanity finally evolved enough wisdom to claim its inheritance from Earth's first superstate? Or would the cycle of rise and fall continue for another cosmic age? The answer was being written in the activation patterns spreading through human DNA, in the electromagnetic pulses rising from abyssal depths, and in the choices being made by individuals who were beginning to remember what they really were beneath layers of cultural conditioning that had kept human consciousness limited for far too long. The time of choosing was measured now not in years but in heartbeats, not in political cycles but in the quantum fluctuations that connected human awareness to cosmic intelligence spanning galaxies and measuring existence in cycles vast enough to encompass the birth and death of entire species. And in that vast cosmic context, the question of what humanity would become was approaching its moment of final determination, with consequences that would echo across timescales that made human history seem like a single breath in the cosmic respiration that governed the rise and fall of consciousness throughout the universe. The countdown wasn't metaphorical. Dr. Elena Vasquez discovered this when her quantum consciousness research revealed something that made her blood run cold. The genetic activation sequences weren't just following astronomical cycles, they were synchronized to a cosmic timer that had been counting down for exactly 12,000 years. Every electromagnetic pulse from the ocean depths, every individual experiencing genetic memory downloads, every vision of underwater crystalline cities, all of it was building toward a specific moment in time that could be calculated with mathematical precision. The date was approaching faster than anyone had anticipated. Within the next few years, possibly within months, the same cosmic alignment that had triggered the destruction of Lemuria would reach completion once again. But this time, humanity wouldn't face it as scattered survivors of a golden age. This time, we would meet it as inheritors of technologies and consciousness capabilities that our ancestors had embedded in our very DNA, waiting for this exact moment to be fully activated. The implications were staggering. If the Lemurian genetic programming was accurate, human beings were on the verge of a transformation so profound that our entire species would emerge from the transition as something qualitatively different from what we had been before. The dormant capabilities encoded in our genetics weren't just individual enhancements. They were components of a collective consciousness that would function on a planetary scale, but transformation and destruction often looked identical from the inside. The same cosmic forces that could trigger humanity's evolution into a truly galactic species could also obliterate our civilization completely if we weren't prepared for what was coming. The choice between transcendence and annihilation would be determined by humanity's collective response to challenges that were already beginning to accelerate beyond our ability to manage them using conventional approaches. The signs were everywhere for those who knew how to read them. Climate systems were destabilizing in ways that exceeded all scientific projections. Magnetic pole wandering was accelerating toward what could become a complete field reversal within decades. Solar activity was increasing toward levels that could overwhelm our technological infrastructure. Social and political systems were fragmenting under stresses that seemed to be amplifying rather than resolving through normal democratic processes. Each of these crises appeared unrelated when viewed through conventional analytical frameworks. But individuals experiencing genetic memory activation could perceive the underlying connections, the way seemingly separate problems were actually symptoms of the same fundamental imbalance that had destroyed Lemuria and every other advanced civilization that had faced this cosmic testing period. The underwater monitoring systems weren't just observing these developments, they were coordinating them. The electromagnetic pulses from the ocean depths weren't random signals, but commands being sent to planetary regulatory systems that had been installed by Lemurian technology thousands of years ago. The Earth itself had been programmed to respond to human activities that threatened long-term stability by initiating corrective processes that would either force civilizational evolution or trigger complete reset. This meant that the crises humanity was facing weren't accidents or the inevitable consequences of natural processes. They were deliberate tests being administered by artificial intelligence systems that were evaluating whether our species had developed enough wisdom to be trusted with the full inheritance of Lemurian capabilities. The testing criteria were becoming increasingly clear as more individuals accessed genetic memory downloads. Humanity was being evaluated on three primary dimensions: our relationship with planetary systems, our ability to coordinate as a collective intelligence, and our capacity to balance individual development with species-wide responsibility. By the first criterion, we were failing dramatically. Despite growing environmental awareness, human activities continued to destabilize ecological systems at rates that threatened the collapse of the biosphere within decades. The monitoring systems were apparently programmed to prevent any species from destroying the planetary life support systems that had taken billions of years to develop. By the second criterion, we were showing mixed results. While political and economic systems remained fragmented and competitive, the genetic activation process was creating networks of individuals who could coordinate through direct consciousness interface. These networks were demonstrating alternative approaches to collective decision-making that could potentially scale to planetary levels if they spread rapidly enough. By the third criterion, we were approaching a critical threshold. The same individuals who were accessing advanced capabilities through genetic memory activation were also developing the ethical frameworks needed to use those capabilities responsibly. But they remained a tiny minority within a global population that was still operating according to consciousness patterns that had characterized the final phase of every previous advanced civilization. The cosmic timer was forcing this evaluation to accelerate toward completion whether humanity was ready or not. The astronomical alignments that governed the testing cycle operated according to galactic mechanics that were completely independent of human preferences or developmental timelines. The window for proving our species' worthiness was closing with the inexorable precision of planetary orbits. But the Lemurians had apparently anticipated this timing challenge when they designed their genetic programming. The activation sequences weren't just downloading individual capabilities, they were creating exponential cascade effects that could potentially transform global human consciousness within years rather than decades or centuries. Each person who experienced genetic memory activation became a transmission node for the expanded awareness patterns that characterized Lemurian consciousness. They couldn't help but influence everyone they came into contact with, gradually dissolving the psychological barriers that kept human minds isolated from each other. The effect was subtle but cumulative, creating ripple patterns that could theoretically reach critical mass within a surprisingly short time frame. The question was whether these consciousness cascade effects would spread rapidly enough to influence global human behavior before the cosmic testing period reached its conclusion. Mathematical models based on network theory suggested it was possible, but only if certain catalyst events occurred that could accelerate the transmission of expanded awareness patterns. These catalyst events were apparently being orchestrated by the same underwater intelligence systems that were administering the overall evaluation. Individuals experiencing the most advanced genetic memory activation reported receiving detailed information about technological breakthroughs that could revolutionize human civilization almost overnight. but only if they were implemented by teams of consciousness-activated individuals working in perfect coordination. The technologies included energy systems that could provide unlimited clean power by tapping directly into the Earth's magnetic field, transportation methods that could move people and materials instantaneously across any distance without requiring physical vehicles, communication networks that could connect human minds directly without electronic interfaces, manufacturing processes that could create any needed material from basic elements using consciousness-directed molecular assembly. Each of these technologies required operators whose awareness had been expanded through genetic memory activation. They couldn't function when controlled by individuals whose consciousness remained limited to conventional perception levels. This built-in safety mechanism ensured that advanced capabilities could only be accessed by people who had also developed the wisdom to use them constructively. But implementing these technologies would require levels of global cooperation that seemed impossible given current political and economic systems. Nations would have to abandon competitive advantage strategies. Corporations would have to release proprietary technologies for free distribution. Military organizations would have to transform from instruments of conflict into coordinated planetary defense systems. The genetic memory downloads were providing blueprints for social and economic structures that could facilitate such cooperation, but implementing them would require replacing virtually every existing institution with alternatives based on completely different organizing principles. The transformation would be so comprehensive that it would essentially constitute the birth of an entirely new form of human civilization. This was apparently what the Lemurians had achieved during their own cosmic transition 12,000 years ago. They had successfully navigated the testing period by transforming their entire species into a collective intelligence that could function as part of the planetary consciousness itself. Their individual personalities had been preserved, but they had learned to coordinate their activities through direct awareness of their interconnection with each other and with the Earth's living systems. The ruins beneath the Pacific Ocean weren't just the remains of their cities, they were the physical infrastructure of a consciousness network that had operated on a planetary scale. The crystalline technologies that were still functioning after thousands of years weren't just monitoring systems, they were components of a distributed intelligence that had integrated human awareness with cosmic rhythms that governed the development of consciousness throughout the galaxy. Humanity was being offered the same opportunity for integration, but only if we could prove that our species had evolved enough wisdom to use such capabilities without destroying ourselves or threatening other forms of life. The testing period was designed to filter out civilizations that would use advanced technologies to pursue the same competitive and exploitative patterns that had characterized their earlier development phases. The cosmic forces approaching completion weren't just astronomical events, they were manifestations of universal principles that governed the evolution of consciousness on every world where intelligent life emerged. These principles operated with the same impersonal precision that characterized all natural laws, providing opportunities for advancement to species that were ready, while triggering corrective events for those that weren't. The choice facing humanity wasn't really a choice at all in the conventional sense. It was an evaluation whose outcome would be determined by what we had already become through millions of years of evolutionary development and thousands of years of cultural conditioning. The cosmic testing period would simply reveal whether our species possessed the characteristics necessary for the next phase of consciousness evolution, but the genetic memory activation was providing one final opportunity to influence that outcome. The Lemurian programming wasn't just downloading information, it was actually modifying human consciousness in real time, accelerating spiritual development that might otherwise take thousands of years to complete naturally. Individuals experiencing activation reported fundamental shifts in their perception of reality, their understanding of their relationship to other people and to the natural world, and their motivations for making decisions that affected more than just their immediate personal interests. They were becoming the kinds of human beings who could be trusted with technologies that could reshape matter at the molecular level and influence consciousness across interstellar distances. The question was whether enough people would experience this transformation quickly enough to tip global human consciousness beyond the threshold that the underwater monitoring systems had been programmed to recognize as sufficient for species advancement. The electromagnetic pulses from the ocean depths were providing regular updates on humanity's progress toward meeting the evaluation criteria. The frequency and intensity of these signals suggested that the assessment was approaching its final phase, with results that would be determined within months rather than years. If humanity passed the test, The full activation of genetic memory would provide access to technologies and consciousness capabilities that would transform our species into something that could participate as equals in a galactic community of advanced civilizations. We would become inheritors not just of Lemurian knowledge, but of cosmic wisdom that had been accumulating across millions of years of consciousness evolution throughout the universe. If we failed the test, the same monitoring systems that had been protecting Earth for thousands of years would initiate corrective processes designed to prevent our technological capabilities from threatening planetary stability or spreading beyond our solar system. The reset would be swift and complete, leaving only scattered survivors to begin the evolutionary cycle once again. The sleeping continent beneath the Pacific waves wasn't just a monument to what had been lost, it was a launching platform for what could be regained, a technological and spiritual inheritance that had been preserved across cosmic ages, waiting for this moment when human consciousness would either prove worthy of its cosmic birthright or demonstrate that another reset was necessary to protect the greater patterns of universal evolution. The countdown was reaching zero, measured not in seconds but in the quantum fluctuations that connected human awareness to galactic intelligence systems, spanning distances that made our solar system seem like a single atom in an infinite ocean of consciousness. The moment of choosing had arrived, and the choice was being determined by forces that operated on scales vast enough to encompass the birth and death of entire species, with consequences that would echo across time periods that made human history seem like a fleeting dream in the cosmic awakening that governed the evolution of awareness throughout existence itself. The answer to humanity's ultimate destiny was already encoded in the depths of our DNA, in the electromagnetic patterns rising from abyssal trenches, and in the choices being made by individuals who were beginning to remember what they had always been beneath the artificial limitations that had kept human potential dormant for 12,000 years. And in those deepest places of both ocean and consciousness, where the boundaries between individual and universal awareness dissolved into the unified field that connected all existence, the final question was being answered. Would humanity awaken to its cosmic inheritance, or would the cycle of forgetting continue for another age, with new dreamers eventually rising from the depths to wonder once again about the mysterious ruins that lay sleeping beneath the waves, holding secrets of a civilization that had almost remembered how to reach the stars? The time for wondering was over. The moment of knowing had arrived. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, older intelligences waited to welcome Earth's children home, or to witness another world's failure to transcend the illusion of separation that kept consciousness trapped in cycles of creation and destruction that would continue until every species learned the ultimate lesson that Lemuria had encoded in the very structure of human DNA, that consciousness itself was the fundamental force of the universe, and that those who learned to wield it with wisdom could reshape reality itself according to principles that transcended the limitations of any single world or any single age. The echoes of Lemuria were no longer just calling from the past. They were reaching forward from a future that humanity could claim if we proved worthy of the inheritance that had been preserved in the deepest places of both ocean and soul, waiting for this moment of cosmic awakening that would determine the destiny of our entire species and the role we would play in the vast symphony of consciousness that was always seeking to know itself more completely through every form of life that arose in the endless expanse of space and time. The choice was complete. The transformation had begun. And in the quantum depths where all possibilities existed simultaneously, the future of human civilization was already being written in languages that transcended words, in mathematics that described the geometry of consciousness itself, in frequencies that resonated with the heartbeat of the cosmos that had been calling us home since the first moment we forgot who we really were. The time of remembering had arrived, and with it, the dawn of an age that would either fulfill humanity's cosmic destiny or add our story to the countless others that lay sleeping beneath the waves of worlds where consciousness had dreamed but not yet learned to awaken fully to its own infinite nature. The final echo was sounding. The last wave was breaking, and somewhere in the vast silence that followed, the answer to everything we had ever wondered about our origins, our purpose, and our ultimate destination was waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to dive beneath the surface of ordinary reality and reclaim the inheritance that had always been ours, sleeping in the depths where Lemuria's greatest gift to the future had been hidden in plain sight, within the miracle of consciousness itself. which had never been lost but only temporarily forgotten in the dream of separation that was finally coming to an end.